All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network and our fine family of broadcast affiliates, both in the terrestrial radios, that's AM, FM, cable, as well as satellite providers worldwide. Toll free, 800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV, and our website. You all probably know by now, but just in case you're joining us for the first time, it's xzoneradiotv.com. X-Zone Nation, my first guest tonight is Joe Augustyn, and after winning a Nissan FOCUS Award for writing and attending AFI on Production Fellowship, Joe spent 2 decades working in Hollywood, writing and producing movies. His first feature film, Night of the Demons, is a cult favorite, gaining more fans with each new generation of teens. Now, in 2001, he left Hollywood to move back east and writes novels. His first published in 2012 was The 9 Lives of Felicia Miller, a dark tale about a teenage girl who is a shapeshifter. His second was Dead Rain, a tale of the zombie apocalypse. Now, his most recently completed a non-fiction book entitled Ghostwriter, The Polaroid Ghost and Other True Tales of the Paranormal. Joe's website is www.wildcatpress.net. And Joe, welcome to the X Zone.
Thank you. Good pleasure to be here.
Tell me, where does your fascination with zombies, demons, ghosts, shapeshifters come from?
It all started when I was really young. My grandmother used to tell us spooky stories, true stories of her, our past, and my family had a lot of ghost stories, and I, from the time I was about 14, I started to really take it seriously. But I've always been a horror fan, basically, and into the paranormal. I remember when I was little, probably like 7 or 8, when I first started to go to the library, and the first books I went for were books about witchcraft and other. I don't know why. It seemed more interesting than mundane subjects.
Sure.
So,
Tell me, have you yourself had any paranormal experiences?
I've had a lot of paranormal all through my life, basically.
Really?
The one that actually solidified my belief took place when I was about 14 years old, and I was always a night person and stayed up late. And when it was the night in June, school had gotten out, and it was a Friday night, so I could stay up totally late, and I was up watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of juice, and my mother had the ironing board set up in the living room we had 5 kids, so she was always busy with housework. I put the glass on top of the ironing board, and I went up to go to the bathroom, and when I was halfway down the stairs, I saw the glass just tumble over as if an invisible hand had just swatted it. And I paused for a second on the stairs, and I instantly rationalized that, the ironing board cover must have had condensation or whatever. I ran downstairs, I got a rag, I went and I wiped it up, I went back into the kitchen, and while I was in there, my dog, Killer, who was a tough little mutt, came in and was standing in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, and I thought he wanted to go out in the backyard, so I went over to open the back door, and I opened it and was holding it open, and instead of coming to go out, he started to growl, and I turned around and I looked, and he was standing just hunched over in the doorway with his fur up and his teeth bared, and his eyes were just kind of glowing, and he was staring at the space right next to me. and it just, between the glass flipping over and that, it freaked me out, and I ran upstairs. When I got to the top of the stairs, he was already up there. He had beaten me somehow on the way. And so I went downstairs and I locked up and went to bed early that night. But since then, I've had a bunch of experiences.
All right, let's talk more about your experiences when we come back from this 2-minute commercial break. Thanks very much for joining us tonight, Joe. Sure. I'm looking forward to the next hour with you. Exonation, Joe Augustyn is our special guest this hour. www.wildcatpress.net. That's www.wildcatpress.net. This is the X-Zone. My name is Rob McConnell. The rel-mar multimedia app is now available at Google Play, also at the Apple Store, and on Amazon.com. You can listen to the show, you can listen to the archives, you can read the X-Chronicles newspaper, watch the X-Zone TV shows, as well as find out who's coming on the show and the events. There's a big price for this, a one-time price of 99 cents. Ooh. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with Joe Augustyn. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Joe Augustyn is our special guest. Augustyn, I should say, is our special guest. www.wildcatpress.net is his website. And Joe, why do you think, here we are in the 21st century, everybody's got high-tech gadgets up the yin-yang, and yet everybody likes to get the bejesus scared out of them. They love watching vampires. They love watching werewolves. Zombies are a big thing. How come?
I think it's basically just escapism. Horror gives people a cathartic experience. It basically takes you a step beyond all the anxiety that we encounter every day, although these days it's pretty hard to compete with the real life anxiety.
Isn't it? Isn't that the truth?
But I think that's the root of it, is that people basically want to get taken to a place where that is kind of abstract, so they can forget about the everyday reality and get focused on this abstract horror, and then have it resolved at the end in a way that hopefully releases their tensions that were built up during the experience.
Geez, the way you describe it sounds therapeutic.
It is. I think it is therapeutic. I think that's why it's so popular.
You know, 2012 was the year of the great apocalypse. We had everybody, well, I should say the majority of people actually believed the world was going to come to an end on December the 21st, 2012. Then we have all these religious cults that are predicting the end of the world. The apocalypse, is this the easy way out for a lot of people?
I think that it just seems like we are closer and closer to a real apocalypse. And so people, I mean, you see what's happening today in the news in the Middle East. And so I think that's, you know, and maybe for some people they actually would like it to come true. I don't know. They're sort of, you know, a group death wish or something, or a chance. I think that there's a kind of curious thrill in like the whole zombie apocalypse thing. I think a lot of people would like to be involved in a zombie apocalypse where all the society breaks down and all the rules. It's, you know, you basically are left to your own devices and your own skills and smarts to survive, basically, with the freedom to, you know, just have an enemy that's like there's no moral attachment to dispatching the enemy, basically. So
is it the fan that dictates to the producers, or is the producer the one who dictates to the fan?
I think that that basically the producer has to do what is right for the producer. Unfortunately, I think too many producers do go the other way, and that's why we have so many lemming productions coming out of Hollywood. You know, a film like Saw hits, and then over the next 5 years, you get 10 different versions of Saw that are not as interesting. The first one might have been interesting because it was novel, but as the novelty wears off, they just become tedious, basically.
Yeah, what are they up to, Rocky 795 by now? Talk about The Walking Dead. Poor Sylvester Stallone doesn't look that well these days. He looks like he's Walking Dead. You shared with us one of your paranormal experiences. Would you be able to share another one with us?
Sure. Actually, the house I live in, I've had a lot of experiences in. I found it. When I moved back from California, I lived in New Jersey for 2 years on the Jersey Shore at my brother's house. And then I was interested in moving back to Philadelphia, and I had this particular neighborhood picked out that I liked. And my brother found a house for sale in the neighborhood, and it was really cheap. It was literally about the price of a mid-range car, and which is about an eighth of what homes in the area normally would go for. So we thought, let's hurry down and take a look at it, and we were the first people to go down and check it out. And it was a shell, basically. It's a house that was on a really nice block, but it was a twin home. There was a house next to it, and it has a double lot. And it had been basically abandoned for about 30 years. And I snatched it up and started to rehab it. And the first thing that happened was that my brother Ron came over. He's a really good plumber. And
Good
he was helping
evening.
me to restore the bathroom.
And welcome to SitePal.
Whoops. Go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
And while he was working, I was standing in the doorway of the upper hallway handing him tools as he needed them. And all of a sudden I heard this weird noise downstairs. It sounded like a giant bird with like 4 or 5 foot wingspan flapping like crazy. And I ran downstairs, and when I got to the bottom of the stairs, the sound stopped. But I ran to the door, and I looked outside. There was nobody there. I didn't know if somebody was pulling a prank or what. But nobody was there. It was nothing. I went back upstairs, and my brother said, what happened? And I said, didn't you hear that? He said, no. And just as I said that, I heard another noise downstairs. This time, it sounded like somebody had walked into the living room with a big metal toolbox filled with wrenches and thrown it down onto the floor. Really loud and distinct sound. And I ran down as fast as I could. There was nobody there. I ran outside, and I looked. There was no way anybody could have gotten. I'm in the middle of the block, and nobody could have disappeared, basically. So that was the start of it. And then a few months after that, I was working. Like I said, I'm a night person, and I worked all night. And then I was up. It was literally 4:45 in the morning, because I've noted at that time since that things happen in this house often at that time. And I haven't figured out why, but I was wide awake. I was in the front bedroom of the house. I was actually checking my email, and I heard the back door downstairs being pushed open, and I had some sleigh bells hung on it just temporarily as sort of a temporary burglar alarm. And not that I needed it, but I heard the bells jingle, and I heard the door being pushed open, and then I heard my oldest brother Al call my name. And I thought that he had probably come into town from New Jersey and gone out like drinking all night at the bars, and then decided to come and crash it, And it didn't make any sense, but I ran downstairs and there was nobody there. The door was locked. There was no disturbance at all. Nobody was there, but I distinctly heard it. And since then I've had several. After I took my parents in, both of my parents were really sickly and elderly, and their neighborhood was starting to go, and I took them in and took care of them for the last years of their lives. And after my mother passed, like the next day, or the next night, I should say, I was watching TV in the bedroom, in the middle bedroom, and the back bedroom was my office, and I heard a really loud metallic sound, and I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe some pots or pans or something fell down on the first floor. Went all through the house, couldn't find it. Finally went in my office, and there were quarters scattered all around the floor. And I was wondering, how did those quarters get on the floor? And then I noticed there was a little white plastic cap from a pill thing, and I realized my mother had kept quarters in this little amber plastic vial, prescription vial that she used for, meters and things like that.
Right.
Parking meters. And after she died, I found it when I was cleaning up her stuff, and I just put it in a drawer in that office, basically. So somehow it got out of that closed drawer and smashed to the floor, basically, to scatter all these coins across.
Unbelievable.
And then a few years later, after my father died, I was on the phone. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was talking to a friend of mine in California, and all of a sudden another loud metallic banging sound. This time it was so loud that he heard it through the phone. And he said, "What is that? Did you drop a pot?" I said, "No, let me go check." And I went downstairs, and nothing there. Then I went up to the office, and I opened the door, and there was an antique metal lighting fixture that I had taken down from the ceiling, and I hadn't put back up. It had been thrown from where it was on a bureau to halfway across the floor, basically, and was lying on the floor. So those are a few of the things. And at a certain point, I talked to the woman who lives next door, who's older and has lived here in the neighborhood for at least 50 years, and I asked her if she ever heard anything strange about this house. And she said, "Well, if I were you, I would have the priest come in and bless that house." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And she explained that that the house had always been in the hands of one family, basically,
right,
from the time it was built in 1925. And there were several mysterious deaths in the house. There was a child who died mysteriously. There was one of the sons actually hung himself in the backyard from a willow tree.
Oh, my Lord.
And supposedly 6 months after he hung himself, the tree was hit by lightning and burned to the ground. And then there was a daughter who was about 30 years old, and she, in the late 50s or early 60s, came home from a union meeting and told her mother she felt tired and just went up to bed and went to sleep and never woke up again. And the final occupant was the son, the one surviving son, basically, who apparently was not all there. And he actually inherited, the mother was like an investor in real estate and left him half a dozen properties, and he would just wander and spend a day at this one and a day at that one, but he never did any repairs or upkeep. And so at one point, the pipe into the house, the main water pipe, burst, and it became uninhabitable, basically. There was no plumbing at all, and he wasn't fit to take care of it, basically. The neighbors would feed him when he came by because they felt sorry for him or whatever. So although he owned it for like the last 30 years of the family, owning it, he barely spent any time there, and it was virtually, abandoned, basically. And then after he died, a cousin who lives across the river in New Jersey inherited it, and he just wanted to get rid of it, so he put it up cheap to get rid of. And
so let me ask you this. We've got to take a news break very shortly, but I'd like to know at this point, did you call a priest in?
No. I don't feel uncomfortable with this stuff. I've had so many experiences over the years, and I basically, I don't know, I just don't feel threatened. I believe in a spirit world, and I believe that there are spirits all around us all the time, basically. And I think a lot of the experiences I've had in this house of a paranormal nature were definitely like kind of teasing, kind of mischievous experiences where once I was lying in bed and I just heard a voice right in my ear just say boo, like a little kid or something, trying to scare, like almost like a cartoon ghost, basically. And another time I heard like a female voice say hello, and it was as if she were like standing right next to me with her, So it could be the ghosts of the people who lived here before, or I don't know. There are a lot of different theories about spirits, and
so is it safe? Is it safe to say that Casper and his gang live in Philadelphia, PA?
I would guess so.
All right, Joe, stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation, Joe Augustyn is our guest. His website is www.wildcatpress.net. That's www.wildcatpress.net. And Joe and I will be back on the other side talking about, one of his movies, Night of the Demons. We're going to be talking to Joe about his newest book, which is nonfiction. It's entitled Ghostwriter, The Polaroid Ghost and Other True Tales of the Paranormal. My name is Rob McConnell. Joe and I will be back on the other side of this news break. Don't go away.
The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back, everyone. Joe Augustyn is my special guest. His website is wildcatpress.net. Joe, did you enjoy doing movies, or do you enjoy being an author more? Or do you just enjoy them both?
I enjoy them both. Movies are definitely more physically demanding, and that was the reason I retired from producing movies. When I did my second film as producer, which was called Night Angel, it was based on the legend of Lilith. It was so intense. I mean, we had so many locations in such a short schedule, and it was a lot of special effects and stunts and all sorts of crazy stuff. And by the time it was over, I literally had developed chronic fatigue symptom and was in bed for 6 weeks and couldn't even get out of bed.
Oh, wow.
So I realized at that point that it was not worth it to do independent films on a low budget, where you have, you're really fighting for every ounce of control just with circumstances. And I'm also, because I'm a night person, it's easier for me, and I'm more solitary. So writing is, I went from being a writer, producer, to just being a screenwriter for about 10 or 15 years, and then went into writing novels. When I came back here, and my intention was to write novels right from the time I came back here, but I just got a few assignments still from California, long distance, and so I continued to do some screenwriting. And then I was interrupted by taking care of my parents who were ill, and then I finally got around to starting to write novels back around 2007 or 8, and I enjoy it. It's more, I can work on my own schedule. I don't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and rush out to the set to be there to make sure everybody's there on time. And because I was a really hands-on producer, I would literally be the first one on the set and the last one to leave. One time on Night of the Demons, I had the grips told me to get lost because I actually stayed behind and was helping them roll cable. I don't know if they felt that I was critiquing them or not, but I was just trying to help out. So,
how long of a production, or how long was the actual film Night of the Demons? How long did it? Was it 45 minutes, 90 minutes, 65 minutes?
No, it was the feature film, about 90 minutes long, and it actually played theatrically.
Really?
It went out regionally. It opened in Detroit. That was the first city. And it actually, when it opened, it was the same weekend as the Last Temptation of the Christ, and that was number one on the variety charts with a per-screen average, and we were number 2. And it played for about 6 weeks in Detroit, and then it opened in New York around Thanksgiving, and it played all the way through Christmas, and that was like in 70 theaters. It was doing really well. It played city by city, but it was like in a wide release in each city. So if you were in that city, it appeared to be a big movie, basically, and did really well. And then finally they took it to down south to Texas, and they got hit with a freak snowstorm, and it still did all right, but it didn't do the big numbers that it had done in the Northeast. So at that point, the producers panicked, and then they just took a really lucrative video deal and sent it to video.
Wow.
But it's fun to see it on the screen. I saw it like 2 years ago at a horror convention with an live audience, and it was a lot of fun. People were laughing at the right parts and, scared of the right parts.
All right, so you've got a 90-minute feature. Now, how long did it actually take to produce that 90-minute feature?
We shot for about 4 weeks. Wow. And it was a really good shoot. It was really easy because basically we had one location. There was one main location of a haunted house, which plays through most of the movie, and then a few other, assorted exterior locations. But we were able to plan our crew on this location. It was a fenced property, and we were totally self-contained. We had our production offices in parts of the building, and we had, we're shooting in other parts. So that made it really easy, because a big part of shooting a feature film is having to move your equipment from location to location, because that eats up a lot of time, and then when you're actually shooting, you're much more under the gun. And that's what happened on the second feature. We went from having basically one location in the first film to having 28 locations in
Whoa.
the second one. And we had to do 28 locations in the same schedule, 24 days, basically.
My Lord.
So it was really insane.
You see, I don't think the majority of people who go to a movie, sit down, they have no concept what's behind it. And
I think that's a good thing.
It is?
I think more people today, like the kids especially, are more in tune. A lot of them go to fan sites and they understand how the special effects are done and whatever, but to me, that takes a little bit of the magic away from it. I think that it's better to just lose yourself in the experience and do it. I mean, it's one thing if you're going to work in the industry and you have to understand all that stuff, but otherwise I think it's better to just go and enjoy the movie.
Now,
But it is a lot of work, and there's so many people that, even a low-budget film like ours, which cost about $1.2 million at the time, which was low budget back in the 80s when you had to shoot with 35mm film and, a huge crew. Today they make movies that, with the same type, when now with all digital effects and everything, you can do a film for $100,000 that would, have the same production value, basically.
Tell me about your book, your new book that you've just completed. It's a nonfiction entitled Ghostwriter, the Polaroid Ghost and Other True Tales of the Paranormal. What's it all about?
Yeah, the first half of the book, it's actually divided into two parts. The first part are my own true ghost stories and those of my family and friends, basically. Some of the stories I told you, and then a bunch of others, maybe, The second half of the book is about phenomena. I have a friend named John Matkowski who we actually went to film school together in Philadelphia before I went to AFI, and we became friends. And then I moved out to California, and he moved out and crashed at my place until he, and we became roommates for a while. And then his father gave him money to buy a house in California. He had found a really great deal on a property up in the hills of northeast Los Angeles, a place called Eagle Rock or Mount Washington. I'm not even sure which neighborhood he's in, but I've heard that people use both. But it's like a little log cabin type house that was built also, and ironically, it was built in 1925, which is the same year that the house I'm in was built.
Oh, wow.
So maybe the house was built that year on it. I don't know, but there were some weird things that happened early on in the house. He had a roommate early on when he first bought it, and that roommate became so frightened of the house, he was hearing footsteps on the roof and insisting that they were like hobnail boots and whatever. He got so freaked out that he eventually moved out. And then I stayed there for 2 weeks around 1990, and I had some experiences that were a little strange. A lucid dream that was really kind of bizarre with his dog, who was a really sweet lab, appeared in it, but with these huge, like, vampire-type fangs.
Oh, my gosh.
And then after I woke up the next morning, I had 2 puncture marks on my foot, and they actually stayed on my foot for about a year after that. But the Ghostwriter phenomenon actually started around 1993. John had a new roommate also named John Huckert, who moved in, and John Matkowski was at work, and John Huckert was home. He's a screenwriter, and at the time he was a struggling screenwriter, and he was working at a desk, and he sensed something across the room. His parents had given him a Polaroid camera for Christmas, and he literally had only shot like 1 or 2 shots with it and didn't want to use it up because Polaroid was expensive. And when he told me that, I kind of found it a little shit. But then when I looked at the numbers on the film, it confirmed that he told the truth, that the same film was in there since the time he bought it. But anyway, what happened was he was sitting at his desk. He sensed something across the room, and he just he picked up the camera and took a picture, and nothing happened. And then he just continued to write, and then the bathroom door at that same area swung open. And at that point, he picked up the camera again and took another picture. And this time, a really startling image came out when the film developed. It was a really strange, ghostly image, which is on the cover of the book. And he snapped off like 2 or 3 photos in quick succession, basically. And the interesting thing is that the first image is of this weird, strange ghost. I call it the Poodle Skin because that's what it looks like. Somebody skinned a poodle, and the skin is just sort of floating in the air. And then the second one looks like the exact same image, except it's closer to the camera, and it's moving forward like in 3-dimensional space. and they're in the book in sequence, but it was really strange. So they got these images, and I saw them, and I was wondering about them, and I kind of suspected a hoax at the time. I'm not easily, although I'm a total believer because of the experience I've had, I'm also very, I'll really scrutinize everything really carefully. And they started to get ghostly messages from this entity. They would ask questions, and the ghost would answer. And it started at a party where they had some friends over, and they were talking about this. And one of their friends suggested, "Well, have you ever tried to communicate with it?" And then he asked the question, and the word "yes" came out on an answer. But it was so broken up and garbled that it was really hard to decipher. And they finally did, and they figured out that they did get a response, and so they continued, and they started to get more and more advanced communication with this thing. But there were two things that sold me on it. One was I was at a party in 1994. They threw a Halloween party, and a lot of people came, and they brought their own Polaroid cameras and their own Polaroid film. And the first hour of the party was just like a typical cocktail party. Nobody, nothing was happening. It was pretty mellow. Everybody was talking, and I was outside on the patio talking to some friends, and all of a sudden we heard all this murmuring in the house, and it was like the energy level just went up, like somebody flipped a switch. So I immediately went into the house to check, and everybody all at once started to get these ghostly pictures, basically. Wow. And there were actually two that I remember that were really striking, and I saw two different pictures that were taken. One was a young man came with a Grim Reaper costume, and somebody took a close-up photo of him, the side of his head, and there was this weird kind of fetal specter, sort of like curved over his face. And it was really bizarre, but it was so striking that it just stuck in my head. And then the other one was a young man came dressed as Charlie Brown, the cartoon character, right. And when somebody took a picture of him, and in front of his head was totally obscured by these weird little ghostly squiggles that looked like somebody, if they had been red, it would have looked like somebody had just blown his head off with a shotgun, basically. And he was so freaked out when he saw the picture that he left the party afterwards. But I remembered those two pictures, and then about 3 or 4 years later, John approached me and asked me if I wanted to write a book about the house, because he knew I had been talking about trying to get into writing books.
Right.
And so I thought it was a great project, and he gave me a whole box filled with VHS tapes. And back in, I think it was 93 or maybe 94, there was a TV show called Sightings. Yeah. And they sent a crew to investigate their house. And they were originally going to do a little 5 or 10 minute segment, but because it was so intriguing, they did an entire show on their house, basically. And they brought Kerry Gaynor, who was one of the parapsychologists from UCLA, who had been involved in the entity investigation. And they also had a photographic expert from, I think it was the Brooks Institute of Photography. And he came with a box of Polaroid film that had been sent from Polaroid. It was a sealed carton that had like half a dozen or a dozen sealed boxes of Polaroid film inside. And these videos that they gave me were the raw footage that the Sightings crew shot, basically. And I saw them on one unbroken take. They pulled one of the fresh boxes out from the carton, logged the numbers, opened it up, handed it to John Matkowski. He loaded it into the camera. All this took place on camera, basically, on the video. Loaded it, and they said, okay, somebody asked a question, and then there's a woman in the room asks, are you an entity that's attached to a person or a place? And John snapped the photograph, and when it came out, the words genius loci came out on the picture, basically. And they had different foreign language dictionaries because it had sometimes, communicated in French or Latin. So they looked it up in the Latin dictionary, and the first person opened theirs, and they said, oh, it's a spirit that's connected to a person or a place, whatever it was. And then Kerry Gaynor opened his and goes, well, my dictionary says it's a person or a place. So it was like a really ambiguous kind of answer to, the question. And that's the typical, like, there are a lot of really concise and pithy, answers that this spirit gives. And supposedly, they asked its name, and it said its name was Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. And then when they investigated later, they found out that there had been a person named Wright who owned the property. I don't think he owned the house. I don't think the house was built there, or maybe an earlier house was built there, but I think he owned the property back in the late 1800s. So it's a pretty interesting story. But then later, when I was doing the book, I got interrupted, and then I came back east. Mm-hmm. And when I went to restart working on the book, I contacted John, and I asked him if he would send me the photographs, and he sent me a bunch of them. And I didn't see the ones that I had mentioned before of the two different guys.
Right.
There were, the two different photos, and I asked if he could find them. And he sent me a photo, and he said, "Is this the one you're talking about?" And it was actually a third photo that was snapped by somebody else, but it was a wide-angle shot, and it included both of those two guys in the photo, and the same phenomenon was present in this photo, too.
Unreal. Stand by, Joe. We've got to take our final break for this hour. Joe Augustyn is our special guest. His website is wildcatpress.net. And Joe is the author of Ghostwriter, The Polaroid Ghost, and Other Tales, True Tales of the Paranormal. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. All right, Joe, you've got to take us back to that story. I've got to know what happened with the Polaroids.
Yeah. Well, the show's been featured on several TV shows like Unexplained Mysteries, mm-hmm. whatever. The last show that covered it was Fact or Fake Paranormal Files, and the investigators there were sure that they were going to debunk the whole thing. They set up a lab experiment, and they replicated photos that they felt were, good copies, basically.
Right.
Although, honestly, they weren't. They had a different they had a reddish tint, which none of the Ghostwriter photos have. They showed up at the house, and they actually set up all their equipment exactly as they had it set up in the lab, and they mm-hmm. thought that it was a slam dunk that they were going to debunk this, and they couldn't do it. They were getting other weird things appearing on their film that they didn't put on there. And they finally were baffled, and no matter what they tried, they could not, replicate the photos in the house. And then they actually did a voice stress analysis of my friends when they interviewed them about it, mm-hmm. and the voice stress showed that they weren't lying, basically. So in the end, they had to declare that they felt that it was a legitimate case. And the same thing with Kerry Gaynor, who he at one point said that he's investigated like thousands of cases of paranormal through UCLA. And he felt that the only two that seemed to be authentic were the entity case and the Ghostwriter case, basically.
So the mystery still lives on.
It still lives on. And apparently they communicate now. They've been trying with digital film, but mm-hmm. it's not the same as Polaroid because obviously it's a lot harder. It will be, the fact is that their Polaroids have been seen developing on video. They've shown... So some people have suggested that they play with the emulsions, but that's not the case. Because I actually have a friend named Michael Dare who's an artist who does that, and I know how that's done, and it's definitely not the case here. I mean, this is whatever's causing them. It's not manipulation, basically. It's really it's a crazy thing. And
tell me what do you think it is?
Okay. I think that it probably is a spirit that is like an advanced spirit, that came back because mm-hmm. it's had a very positive effect on the lives of the people in the house. The two Johns were both struggling in their careers, and when it started, they both wanted to be screenwriters and get in the movie industry, and they had been banging their heads against the wall for a long time. And then finally, with their encouragement, they kept writing, and then they finally had their first feature made. And then they basically, have had other successes since then. And then there was another person, Noel, who moved into the house also, and he was at loose ends when he moved in. They took him in because he was going through a crisis, and the spirit hadn't communicated for a few years because the other guys had gotten their lives together, then it started to communicate with Noel and sort of helped him to sort of get focused and,
Wow.
get his life in order. So I think it's a positive spirit, basically, that just happens to be able to communicate and, appear on that property. And I also think that there are geophysical aspects of, spirit materialization, and I think their property is it's set in the middle of the woods up on this rocky. I think that it's just the right kind of atmosphere for a portal, which is what Peter James, the psychic, said is on their property, basically. In fact, a few psychics have visited the property, and they always point to the same spot, which is right near that bathroom door where the first picture was taken. They didn't know anything about that. They came in and they said that that's what the psychic, vortex was, where these spirits come through.
Hey, Joe, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure. Continued success. And I'd love to have you back on in the future to discuss more of your tales and to see if there's anything else that's happened in your home.
Okay.
Joe, take care of yourself.
That would be great.
All right, Joe.
Thank you very much.
My great pleasure. Joe Augustyn has been my guest this hour, www.wildcatpress.net. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the hour. Don't go away.